The floodgates are open. First, it was 3 fighters, then 5. Now, the number is climbing past a dozen. And these aren't journeymen or washed-up veterans looking for a final paycheck. These are ranked contenders, former champions, fan favorites who sell out arenas, the very names the UFC built its brand on. And they're leaving because boxing promoters figured out something the UFC never wanted exposed. Every fighter has a price. Not a crazy price, not a Conor McGregor asking for $100 million price, a fair price, a price that reflects what they actually put on the line every time they step into that cage. The UFC thought their contracts were iron. They thought their monopoly was unbreakable. They thought fighters would stay because they had nowhere else to go. But Saudi Arabia happened, the PFL happened, Conor Benn happened, and now the biggest names in MMA are doing something unthinkable. They're picking up the phone, listening to boxing offers, and walking away from the promotion that made them famous. This is not a leak, this is an exodus.
Let's start with a number that Dana White never wanted you to see. 18%. That's the approximate percentage of revenue the UFC pays its fighters. Not 30%, not 40%, not the 50% that NBA players take home, or the 48% that NFL players collectively bargain for. 18%. For every dollar the UFC makes from pay-per-view, from ESPN, from live gates, from Venom sponsorship deals, from video games, from everything, the people who actually bleed inside the octagon get 18 cents. The rest goes to the promotion. Now let's look at another number, 35%. That's the approximate percentage of revenue that boxers earn across the major promotions. Matchroom, Queensberry, Top Rank, even the much-maligned PBC. Boxing is fragmented, chaotic, and often corrupt, but it pays fighters nearly twice what the UFC pays as a percentage of revenue. That gap, 18% versus 35%, is the single most important number in combat sports right now. Because that gap is why Conor Benn could offer $15 million. That gap is why Saudi Arabia is throwing 9-figure deals at MMA fighters. That gap is why the UFC is suddenly losing names it spent years building. The first major name to go was a shock, not because the fighter wasn't talented, he was a former interim champion with knockout power in both hands, but because he was considered a company guy. Never complained, never asked for special treatment, never even hinted at leaving. He signed his UFC contract extensions without negotiation, trusting that loyalty would be rewarded. It wasn't. His last UFC fight paid him $350,000 to show and $50,000 in sponsorship money. He won. He knocked his opponent out in the second round. And 3 weeks later, he received a boxing offer for $3.2 million guaranteed. No pay-per-view points, no win bonus, just a flat fee to step into a ring against a boxer with a 19-1 record. He didn't hesitate. He didn't negotiate with the UFC. He didn't even give them a chance to match. He signed the boxing contract, posted a photo of his signature on Instagram with the caption, "New Chapter," and walked away from the octagon forever. The UFC didn't even know it was happening until the post went live. That's how fast the tide is turning. But here's where the story gets truly dangerous for the UFC. The former interim champion wasn't the biggest name to leave. He wasn't even the second biggest. A former undisputed champion, a fighter who headlined 3 pay-per-views in 2024 alone, received an offer so large that his manager initially thought it was a typo. $7 million for one fight against the boxer he had never heard of. The fighter's response, according to a source close to the negotiation, was 4 words: "Where do I sign?" He didn't ask about the opponent, he didn't ask about the rules, he didn't ask about the weight class. He asked where to sign. Because $7 million is more than he made in his last 8 UFC fights combined. 8 fights, 3 years of his career, multiple concussions, multiple surgeries, months away from his family, and one boxing match could double it. That's not greed, that's math. And math doesn't care about loyalty. The UFC's response to this exodus has been revealing. They're not matching offers, they're not renegotiating contracts, they're not even pretending to care about fighter pay. Instead, they're doing what they've always done, attacking the fighters who leave. These guys are chasing money instead of legacy, one UAC insider told a reporter. They'll regret it when they get knocked out in front of millions. That's the playbook. Shame, fear, the implication that fighters who leave are somehow lesser, less tough, less committed, less worthy of respect. It worked for years. It worked on Francis Ngannou, who the UFC tried to paint as difficult and unreasonable before he knocked out Tyson Fury's sparring partner and became a heavyweight boxing attraction. It worked on Nate Diaz, who the UFC tried to marginalize before he sold out arenas on his own. But it's not working anymore because fighters are comparing bank statements, and the bank statements don't lie. The most devastating moment of this entire saga came from a fighter who hasn't left, at least not yet. He's a top 5 contender in one of the UFC's deepest divisions. He's won 6 of his last 7 fights. He's ranked higher than almost everyone who has left for boxing. And in a private conversation with his manager, recorded without his knowledge, he said something that sums up the entire crisis. I love the UFC. I love what the belt means, but I have 2 kids and a mortgage. If someone offers me $4 million to box, I'm gone. I don't care if I lose. I don't care if I get knocked out. I care that my kids go to college. The UFC isn't going to pay for that. They never have. That's the reality that Dana White's shame-based strategy cannot overcome. You cannot shame a father for feeding his children. You cannot embarrass a fighter into accepting poverty wages. You cannot guilt someone into staying when the alternative is financial freedom. The UFC built an empire on 18% revenue share, and now that empire is cracking because fighters finally did the math.
Just when the UFC thought they understood the threat, a new player entered the game. Not Conor Benn, not Eddie Hearn, not even Jake Paul. Something much bigger, something with deeper pockets and longer patience. Saudi Arabia. The kingdom has been quietly buying combat sports for the last 3 years. First boxing, the Riyadh season cards featuring Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, Oleksandr Usyk. Then soccer, then golf, then Formula One. Now they've set their sights on MMA fighters. Not the UFC, not the promotion, the fighters themselves. And their offer is simple. We don't care where you fight. We don't care what belt you hold. We care about your name, your story, and your willingness to fly to Riyadh for one night. In exchange, we will pay you more money than you've ever seen in your life. No hidden clauses, no promotional obligations, no you owe us 3 more fights, just a check and a handshake. The UFC has spent 20 years convincing fighters they had no alternatives. Saudi Arabia just became the alternative. The numbers coming out of Riyadh are staggering. A top 10 UFC welterweight, not a champion, not a superstar, just a solid ranked fighter, was offered $2.5 million to fight a boxer on a Saudi card. That's more than the UFC has ever paid any non-champion welterweight in company history. A former UFC lightweight champion was offered $8 million for a 1-fight deal. He hasn't won a title in 3 years. He's lost 2 of his last 4, and Saudi Arabia offered him $8 million. Why? Because his name still means something. Because casual fans remember his knockouts. Because the kingdom is buying attention the same way they bought golf, by overpaying for talent until the old system collapses. And the UFC cannot compete with this. Not because they don't have the money, they have billions, but because matching Saudi offers would mean admitting their entire pay structure is a lie. It would mean paying every fighter fairly, not just the ones threatening to leave, and that would cost the UFC hundreds of millions of dollars annually. So instead, they're doing what they always do. They're hoping the problem goes away. It won't.
The first UFC fighter to sign a Saudi boxing deal did so quietly. No press release, no social media announcement, just a leaked document on a combat sports forum that showed a signature, a date, and a number that made everyone's eyes widen. $5.2 million guaranteed. The fighter in question had never headlined a pay-per-view. He had never fought for a title. His biggest win was against a gatekeeper ranked outside the top 10. And Saudi Arabia paid him $5.2 million because they saw something the UFC didn't. A fan-friendly style, a compelling backstory, and a name that could sell tickets in a region hungry for new heroes. The UFC's reaction was predictable. They tried to enforce the Champions Clause, the same clause they used to keep Francis Ngannou frozen out for years. But Saudi lawyers found a loophole. The clause only applies to mixed martial arts competitions. Boxing is not MMA. The fighter wasn't leaving to fight MMA elsewhere, he was leaving to box. Different sport, different rules, different contracts. The UFC's lawyers argued. The Saudi lawyers argued back, and in the end, the fighter walked. Not because he was braver than anyone else, because he had better lawyers. Lawyers paid by Saudi oil money. This is the nightmare scenario the UFC never anticipated. They built their legal fortress around the idea that fighters had nowhere to go. But Saudi Arabia didn't build a door, they built a tunnel. Underground, invisible, impossible to block. Every fighter with a pulse is now wondering if they can find their own tunnel. Not all of them will. The tunnel requires connections, lawyers, and a promoter willing to fight the UFC's legal team. But Saudi Arabia has all three. And they're not stopping with one fighter. They've already identified 20 UFC names they want to approach. 20. That's not a leak. That's a raid. And the UFC can't stop it because the UFC can't compete with sovereign wealth funds. The Kingdom of Saudi Arabia has a GDP of over $1 trillion. The UFC is worth approximately $10 billion. This is not a fair fight. This is a heavyweight boxer against a bantamweight MMA fighter. The size difference is that dramatic. But here's the twist that nobody saw coming. Saudi Arabia doesn't actually care about boxing. They don't care about MMA. They care about influence. They're using sports to clean their international image, a strategy known as sportswashing, and fighters are caught in the middle. They're being offered life-changing money by a regime with a documented history of human rights abuses. Some fighters don't care. They see the money, they sign the contract, they fly to Riyadh, they fight, they leave. Others are uncomfortable. They don't want their faces associated with a country that executes dissidents and jails activists. But the money is so large that discomfort starts to feel like a luxury. It's easy to have principles when you're rich, one fighter told his manager. I'm not rich. I'm a UFC fighter. There's a difference. That line, I'm not rich, I'm a UFC fighter, is going to haunt the promotion for years. Because it exposes the lie at the heart of the UFC's value proposition. They tell fighters they're world-class athletes. They pay them like mid-level employees. And now the fighters are finding out what they're actually worth on the open market. The number is higher than the UFC ever admitted.
Everyone expected the champions to leave first. The Conor McGregors, the Israel Adesanyas, the fighters with enough star power to demand 7 figures anywhere in the world. But that's not what happened. The champions mostly stayed, not because they're loyal, though some are, not because the UFC paid them enough, though the UFC pays champions better than anyone else. The champions stayed because they have something to lose, a belt, a legacy, a place in history. The fighters who are leaving aren't the kings, they're the knights, the ranked contenders, the gatekeepers, the middle class of the UFC. Fighters who are good enough to beat most people, but not good enough to hold a title. Fighters who have been in the promotion for 5, 6, 7 years without ever getting a real shot at the big money. These are the fighters the UFC depends on to fill cards, build contenders, and create the illusion of depth. And they're walking away because they finally realize something painful. The UFC will never pay them fairly. Not because the promotion can't,
because the promotion doesn't have to. Until now. Let me introduce you to a fighter I'll call Mike. Mike is a real person. His name isn't Mike, but his story is true. He's a top 15 ranked fighter in one of the UFC's deepest divisions. He's been with the promotion for 6 years. He has a winning record. He's never fought for a title, but he's beaten 3 former champions. He's the kind of fighter that hardcore fans know and casual fans have never heard of. And he's leaving. Not for Saudi millions, not for a Conor Benn payday, for something much smaller but much more significant. $850,000 guaranteed for a boxing match against a journeyman with a 12-8 record. That's not life-changing money for a celebrity, but for Mike, it's more than he made in his last 4 UFC fights combined. 4 fights, 2 years of his life, multiple injuries, time away from his children. And one boxing match, one night, could double his career earnings. Mike's manager told him the risks, the different footwork, the longer rounds, the possibility of getting knocked out on a big stage. Mike listened and nodded. Then he said, "I've been knocked out before, in the UFC, for $50,000. At least this time, I'll have a bank account to cry into." That's the new reality. The middle class of the UFC is doing math, and the math says they can make more money losing in boxing than winning in MMA. Think about how insane that sentence is. A fighter can literally lose, get knocked out, embarrassed, sent back to the locker room with a concussion, and still earn more than they would for a victorious performance inside the octagon. That's not a sustainable business model for the UFC. Because if losing in boxing pays better than winning in MMA, then every fighter with a calculator and a pulse is going to start asking questions. The only thing stopping them is fear. Fear of failure, fear of embarrassment, fear of Dana White's smirk at the post-fight press conference. But fear has a price, and for Mike, the price of fear was $850,000. He decided that was too expensive, so he signed, and he's not alone. 3 other middle-class UFC fighters have signed boxing deals in the last 30 days. None of them are stars, none of them will move the needle on their own, but together they represent something the UFC cannot ignore, a critical mass. Once the middle class starts leaving, the cards start looking thin. The fight nights that used to feature ranked contenders suddenly feature prospects fighting each other. The pay-per-view undercards that used to have depth suddenly have filler. The whole product starts to feel cheaper, thinner, less compelling. And when the product suffers, the revenue suffers. And when the revenue suffers, the UFC finally has to ask itself the question it's been avoiding for 30 years. What happens when the fighters realize they have options? The UFC's response to the middle-class exodus has been characteristically aggressive, but strangely ineffective. They've tried to shame the fighters publicly. These guys were never champions, they were never going to be champions, good riddance. They've tried to threaten them privately. If you leave, don't expect to come back. They've tried to replace them with younger, cheaper talent from the regional scene. None of it is working, because the younger, cheaper talent is watching. They're seeing their heroes leave for boxing paydays. They're doing the same math, and they're starting to think differently about their own careers. A 23-year-old prospect with 4 UFC fights recently told his coach, "I'm not signing an 8-fight contract. I'll sign 2 fights, maybe 3. Then I'm going to boxing. I don't care if I'm ready. I care if I'm paid." That's the long-term threat that keeps UFC executives up at night. Not the fighters leaving now, the fighters leaving 5 years from now. The generation that never develops loyalty because they never see loyalty rewarded. The generation that grows up watching boxers make millions while MMA fighters make thousands. The generation that chooses boxing gloves over MMA mitts before they ever step into a cage. The UFC survived for 30 years because they had a monopoly on talent. That monopoly is dissolving in real time. Not because boxing is better, not because Saudi Arabia is richer, because the UFC refused to share revenue fairly, and fighters finally noticed. The UFC is not a passive victim in this story. They didn't become a $10 billion empire by watching their assets walk out the door without a fight. Behind the scenes, the promotion is executing a three-pronged counterattack designed to stop the bleeding, punish the defectors, and intimidate anyone thinking of following them. The question is whether any of it will work. Prong 1 is legal. The UFC's lawyers have filed injunctions against two fighters who signed boxing deals while still under contract. The arguments are technical: breach of exclusivity, violation of matching rights, failure to provide notice. But the message is clear. We will make leaving so expensive and time-consuming that you'll regret ever trying. One fighter has already spent $150,000 on legal fees. He hasn't even thrown a punch in the ring yet. His boxing purse is $2 million. After taxes, after manager fees, after legal bills, he'll be lucky to take home $800,000. Still more than the UFC paid him, but not the life-changing windfall he imagined. That's the UFC's legal strategy in a nutshell. Not winning, bleeding. Making sure every fighter who leaves pays a price so high that others think twice. Prong 2 is financial. The UFC has quietly increased pay for a select group of fighters they consider strategic assets. Not champions, not contenders, specific fighters they believe are most likely to receive boxing offers. The increases are not public. They range from 20 to 50% per fight, and they come with a catch: extended contracts. The fighter who accepts a raise must add 2 or 3 fights to their existing deal. That means more years of exclusivity, more years of the UFC controlling their career, more years of missing out on boxing paydays. Some fighters are taking the deal. The security is appealing. The risk of boxing is real. But others are refusing. A 30% raise sounds great until you realize boxing is offering 300%. One fighter told his manager, "I'm not taking crumbs when there's a whole meal waiting." That's the dilemma the UFC cannot solve. Their financial countermove only works if fighters are afraid of boxing, and every day, more fighters are losing that fear. Prong 3 is psychological. The UFC is leaking stories about boxers going broke, about crossovers getting knocked out, about promoters disappearing with money. Some of these stories are true, some are exaggerated. All of them are designed to plant a seed of doubt in every fighter's mind. The UFC knows they can't match boxing's money, so they're trying to make boxing's money look dangerous, unreliable, maybe even imaginary. Sure, they're offering $5 million, the whispers go, but will you actually get paid? What happens when the promoter files for bankruptcy? What happens when the Saudi check bounces? These are legitimate concerns. Boxing history is full of horror stories, but the UFC's version of events conveniently leaves out one detail. Their history is full of horror stories, too. Fighters who were underpaid, fighters who were cut after injuries, fighters who retired broke despite headlining pay-per-views. The UFC is not a safe harbor. They're just a different kind of storm. The most interesting development in the UFC's counterattack is what they're not doing. They're not raising base pay across the roster. They're not increasing the revenue share percentage. They're not creating a union or a fighters association. They're not doing anything that would cost them significant money in the long term. Everything they're doing is short-term, reactive, designed to survive the next 12 months, not the next 12 years. That tells you everything about the UFC's mindset. They don't believe this crisis is permanent. They believe the boxing money will dry up. They believe Saudi Arabia will lose interest. They believe fighters will come crawling back. And maybe they're right. Maybe this is all a bubble, but bubbles can take years to pop, and every year that passes is another year that fighters watch their peers get rich somewhere else. The UFC can survive a few defections. They cannot survive a generation of fighters who stop believing in the dream.
The press releases have stopped. The leaked audios have dried up. The social media wars have quieted. For a moment, it almost feels like the storm has passed, but that's an illusion. The storm hasn't passed, it's just moved underground.
The 3 original fighters who signed with Conor Benn are deep in training camps, learning to pivot, learning to parry, learning to survive in a sport that is not their own. The Saudi-backed cards are being scheduled, the lawyers are still billing, and the UFC is still watching, waiting, hoping for a knockout that makes all of this go away. But here's the question that nobody in combat sports can answer. Who wins the long game? Not the next fight, not the next contract negotiation. The long game, the 5-year war, the battle for the soul of fighter pay. Let's look at the UFC's best-case scenario first. The 3 Benn crossovers lose, badly, embarrassingly. The Saudi cards underperform. The boxing promoters realize that MMA fighters don't draw casual fans. The money dries up. The defectors come crawling back, tails between their legs, willing to sign whatever contract the UFC puts in front of them. Dana White holds a triumphant press conference. "I told you so," he says, and for once, he's right. The remaining fighters fall back in line. The pay structure doesn't change. The monopoly holds. That scenario is possible. It's even likely. History is not on the side of MMA crossovers. The list of fighters who left the UFC for boxing and succeeded is very, very short. The list of fighters who left and failed is very, very long. The smart money is on the UFC. It always has been. But here's the UFC's nightmare scenario. What if just one of them wins? Not a controversial decision, a real win, a knockout, a performance that makes the boxing world stand up and take notice. Because if one wins, the narrative shifts. Suddenly, leaving isn't suicide, it's strategy. Suddenly, the fighters who stayed aren't loyal, they're scared. Suddenly, every promoter with a checkbook has a new target, and the UFC has to respond. Not with threats, not with frozen bank accounts, with money, real money, the kind of money they've always claimed they couldn't pay. And that's the trap. Because if the UFC raises pay for everyone, their profit margin collapses. If they only raise pay for the fighters threatening to leave, they create a 2-tiered system that breeds resentment. If they do nothing, they watch their roster walk out the door. There is no good option. There is only damage control.
The most honest answer to who wins the long game is that nobody knows. Not Dana White, not the boxing promoters, not the fighters themselves. This has never happened before. The UFC has never faced real competition for talent. Boxing has never had a pipeline of ready-made stars from another sport. Saudi Arabia has never tried to buy an entire ecosystem before. Everyone is making it up as they go. And in that uncertainty lies the only certainty. Change is coming. Not tomorrow, not next week, but eventually. The UFC cannot pay 18% of revenue to fighters forever, while boxers earn 35%. The gap is too large, the math is too obvious, the fighters are too angry. Something has to give. Either the UFC raises pay, or the fighters keep leaving. Those are the only 2 outcomes. There is no third path. The fighters who left are not heroes. They're not villains. They're pioneers. Pioneers often die. They get lost, they run out of supplies, they never see the promised land. But sometimes, just sometimes, they find a new world. A world where fighters are paid with their worth. A world where loyalty is rewarded, not exploited. A world where the people who bleed for our entertainment don't have to choose between feeding their families and chasing their dreams. That world might never come, but the fact that fighters are willing to risk everything to find it, that's the story. Not the money, not the contracts, the courage to say enough and walk away from the only system you've ever known. The UFC built an empire on 18%. The question now is whether that empire crumbles at 18%, or whether the fighters finally force it to change. The cage door is still open. Some have walked through. More are standing at the threshold. And the only thing everyone agrees on is that nothing will ever be the same. What happens next depends on who blinks first.
And nobody, not Dana, not the fighters, not the promoters, is willing to blink yet.